Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bev Rudman at the Office of Recapitalization. I'm the Director of Closing and Post-Closing here, and we really thank you for joining us today. The goal for today is to give you some information and some tools to help you successfully close your transaction. And this is kind of a long slide deck, and we only have an hour, so we're going to try to highlight the things that highlight some of the things here, but we will be sending the slide deck out afterwards, so you'll have that as a reference. Some housekeeping items before we begin. This is recorded. This is being recorded, just so you know, and we are going to try to leave some time at the end for questions. If you have a question, what you need to do is click on the hand, which is to raise your hand, and we're going to see if there are a lot of questions, we'll try to stop and address things at the time. And again, otherwise we'll try to have some time at the end. I'm definitely not going to cover every point on the slides, but you'll have these for reference. Well, why are we here today? This slide shows you the topics that we plan to cover, and really the goal is always how to keep your transaction moving. We at HUD tend to talk in lingo, so we've got this slide here with some of our acronyms and abbreviations. Just maybe the only one I'll talk about right now, or two. I will talk about two. The Rad Closing Coordinator with the Rad CC, and the RCC at the end, which is your Rad Conversion Commitment. And that gives the Rad Conversion Commitment is what governs the closing of your transaction. So here we are. Objective 1, understand the key players involved. On this screen, you'll see that one of the things that makes closing a Rad transaction a little bit challenging is that there can be a lot of different players involved. And the reason, the value of having a closing coordinator is that the closing coordinator can be the point person for each of those parties who's involved. The Rad, and let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Rad Closing Coordinator really is the main point of contact during the closing process. And the Rad Closing Coordinator should be in understanding what each of the external parties needs to accomplish in order to get to the successful closing. And if you keep the communication open with your closing coordinator, that's the best way of helping you get to a successful closing, because we need to know if there's any hurdles, if there are any problems arising, if there's anything that needs policy consideration within HUD, or if it needs some legal discussion within HUD. That's the way, or if it's the outside parties who are doing something but they're not moving quickly, let your closing coordinator know, and that's the best way to try to help things move forward. We'll talk more about funding later, but just note also that the Rad Closing Coordinator is a point of contact about some of the funding forms and requirements that need to happen to move your money from your PIH accounts into the Rad accounts for the closed transaction. Okay. For every Rad conversion commitment, you will have a closing coordinator assigned, and you'll also have a HUD field counsel assigned. In addition, of course, you have the transaction manager. So those 3 HUD folks are all going to be working on it. Again, we want your main point of contact to be the closing coordinator, but you should know that behind the scenes, the HUD field counsel is going to be working with your outside counsel, going to be reviewing legal documents and trying to confirm that statutory requirements for ownership and control are met, to understand exactly from your survey and title, exactly what's being released from your DOTs or DORCs, and exactly what's going to be covered in the use agreement. So we rely on the field counsel to make sure that the legal part of the transaction is reviewed and approved. The transaction manager and the branch chief, and really they both operate within the transaction division. And you will be used to working with them from the time you got your CHAP until the RCC is issued. Once the RCC is issued, it becomes active in closing, and the closing coordinator, again, becomes your point of contact. The TM is the transaction manager, or we say TM, is always there, and there are certain things that they will have to review during the closing process, but they're only involved to the extent that they're needed for those reviews. Then we have the Hud Pih Field Office folks. Because you are in what I like to call PIH world before conversion, we need to have the PIH folks in the field office involved. They're going to be looking at your non-dwelling units, excess land. They're going to be checking that your PHA plan was properly amended, and they're going to verify your PBV components in an approved administrative plan. Basically, they have a full checklist that they're going to be reviewing in order to get to the RCC. And again, if any questions come up during the closing process, we will be reaching out to them. Next HUD players are the multifamily regional centers. And again, because this is Rad Conversion and converting from public housing to Section 8 platform, you're going to be working with the multifamily field staff. And you can see that there's a list of what you'll need to cover with them. I would say that during the closing is an opportunity to establish the relationship with the multifamily field staff that you're going to be dealing with, because they're going to be having the responsibility for ongoing asset management. This slide in 3 small bullets really covers a lot of ground. So basically, anybody who's not HUD is on this slide. And the point here, again, is that there are a lot of different parties that have to work together to assemble the draft closing package that you need to provide to us in order for us to review and move on forward to closing. So ask us for help if you need it. If something's not working out right, let us know. My name and phone number are at the back of this slide deck, and I think also my HUD email. So you can come to me, you can send questions at any time to the Rad Resource Desk, and that email address is also at the end of the slide deck. So you have places to go if something is hung up and you don't know what to do next because your external party is some other party in the transaction may not be doing what they are supposed to, or you may not know what they're supposed to be doing. So that's my second bullet, ask HUD for help. And then please, in order to keep things moving, once you have submitted your draft documents and you get comments back, it's important to be responsive to those comments and to keep the lines of communication open. So we've just talked about the key players involved, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about the process itself. How do you get from an RCC to an actual closing? So again, your RCC is the sort of the end of the part where you worked with the transaction manager, you got your financing plan approved, and now we have the terms of this Rad closing memorialized in the RCC. It will be sent out to you with a PDF or as a PDF file. We aren't sending out original hard copies anymore, and you do not need to reply to us with a hard copy. But what you do need to do is fully execute, have the RCC fully executed within 30 days of the time that HUD has issued it. Because in the document itself, there's no way to extend that 30-day period. So what I say to people is, even if there's something in that RCC that you think needs to be adjusted, revised, tweaked, you're not sure what it means, please, what I say is, I beg you to go ahead and sign it, send it back to us so that we have a contract that we can then work through, and nobody closes until everybody agrees to the terms. So you haven't given away anything, and you can still make changes. If there's something you feel super strongly about, you can always write a letter that goes back, send that back to us as well, or email it to your closing coordinator. But if you don't sign it within 30 days, it just creates an administrative burden for everybody because we have no way to extend that 30-day period. So I hope I made my point to please sign it in 30 days. You will have, the closing coordinator will be assigned to you. You will receive a list of, you've been putting in a list of contacts into the Rad Resource Desk. We use those. We also talk to the transaction manager to see who else should be on these emails. But the closing coordinator is responsible to send out what we call the hello email that lists a few items of what needs to be done immediately, but it starts to establish that relationship and to find out all the parties who should be involved on any further emails. In addition, there's a kickoff call so people can talk to each other and try to straighten out anything that is seeming to be maybe confused or maybe not sure who's responsible to move something forward. And we also have on this slide to remember that at least one resident meeting must be held after RCC issuance. The submission of the draft closing package, I'm going to spend a minute on this because this is really what drives us to allow us to get to a closing. We are expecting that you look at the Rad closing checklist. It's going to be the last exhibit, Exhibit E in the RCC. It's also available at any time by looking at the resource desk. That lists all the different documents that need to be provided to HUD. Many are for legal review. Some are also for program review and need to go, or only for program review as well, and need to go to the closing coordinator. But we can't move to closing until we have that package of draft documents. Again, you're submitting a draft. We should not be seeing anything executed at that time. We're saying you have to provide us with these documents and we will review them and we'll make comments about them. And then when we're all cleared on the comments, we'll be able to get to executable versions. Our ideal is that you would submit documents within 2 weeks of getting the RCC. There would be maybe 2 weeks of review by HUD parties, maybe 2 weeks of responding to that review and iterative process to get to the final acceptable closing documents that are acceptable to all parties, and then 2 weeks to do the physical work of closing because a lot of these documents have to be signed and notarized, and within HUD itself there could be 2 different signatures we need, or 3 different signatures, or 4 different signatures, depending on the exact specifics of the transaction. So if you put all those 2s together, it comes out to 8 weeks. And very few of our deals right now are closing within 8 weeks, but that really is our goal, and I would hope that you would also try to meet that. So you can skip this page. The last things that the Rad closing coordinator is going to need to get from you is a fully executed consolidated owner certification, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. But I do want to say the very first thing on that certification is we ask you to identify who a point of contact who will be responsible for providing us with post-closing documents. On this slide, I want to highlight again the logistics. Although we're all used to now pushing a button and having documents move back and forth, as I just said a moment ago, this is a real estate transaction and there are closing documents that you will need to be getting in a physical form. And so, and the people at HUD who sign these are not always accessible to us because they have other things on their calendar. So I really, again, urge you to always keep in mind that even once we all agree on everything and all the documents have been acceptable to all parties, you should really plan for at least a week and maybe 2 to actually get to your closing. Because, again, documents have to move. We won't send our signed documents to the PHA. We will only send them to what we consider an escrow agent, which is a title company or an outside counsel. And so they will get them. They will need to get signatures as well and then go to the recording process. So you should make sure that in your thinking about it, always leave time for those logistics. In this program, the date of recording is what we consider to be the Rad closing date. That's kind of important because the Hap contract effective date flows from that. The Hap effective date is either the first of the month following your month of closing or the first day of the second month following your month of closing. So if on May 17th, your documents are complete and taken to the recorder's office and you let us know that it's closed, you would have a choice of having your Hap effective date be June 1st or July 1st. And what we found is that a lot of people feel that it's very helpful to have that additional month because of having to get administrative requirements complete, like, for example, getting leases signed. I think one of the biggest questions we get about closing is, when does your Section 8 funding begin? So if your Hap is effective in 2017, your Section 8 funding begins in 2018. Oh, sorry, and I probably should move that up. I obviously forgot we were already in 2018 this morning when I wrote this. But if your Hap, so let's say if your Hap is effective on November 1st of 2018, your Section 8 funding will begin in 2019. But if you close in December of 2018, your Section 8 funding, remember I said your Hap effective date would be the month after or 2 months after. So your Hap effective date would be in 2019, and your Section 8 funding wouldn't begin until 2020. You would still be under PIH appropriations in 2019. That's a pretty key concept, and let me just say it one more time. If your Hap effective date begins in 2018, your Section 8 funding begins in 2019. But if your Hap effective date doesn't start till 2019, then your Section 8 funding is 2020. How are we doing on questions? Do we have any questions?
A couple hands raised.
A couple of hands. Why don't we do one more slide and then we'll go to the questions. Okay, development costs. What I want to emphasize here is that you really need to think about this conversion, that this is your one chance to move money from public housing to support the transaction that is being closed under this commitment. You can't go 3 months later and say, oh, I had this reserve account. No, for example, this may just have happened. Oh, I have a reserve account at a certain bank for a certain purpose, and oh, if I had thought about that, I could have converted it, so could I do it now? And if it's after closing, you can't do it. But if you had thought about it, and if you had made it part of your financing plan, and if it had been listed as a source, and if it was an acceptable source, then yes, you could have converted that money and had it be available for that property. So it's really, really important. One of the things I like to say is, remember to pay attention to the money. There's so much else that you have to think about. There are so many documents, there are so many plans, there are so many amendments, there are so many forms. But remember to think about your money. So that comes in handy when you're thinking about your development costs, also when you're thinking about the money that's available for you in the end of the appropriation year and the calendar year in which you close. Just keep that in mind, please. The next,
pause for some questions.
Yeah, let's just put up the next slide, and then just want to say, I'm not going to touch this slide, but you can certainly look at it, and if you have questions, let us know. Okay, move to the objective 3, and then we'll just see if there's a couple of questions. We're at 23 and 20. Yeah.
All right, we have some hands raised. Alyssa Winston, you've unmuted your line if you'd like to ask a question. Alyssa, are you there? All right. I'm back to you.
Somebody there? Are
Oh.
you unmuting?
Okay, we'll come back to you. Roberta Edwards, you're on the air. Roberta's also gone. All right, moving to our third question asker. Alcherry Williams, are you out there? Alcherry Williams of McKean County, Pennsylvania. Is
your phone on mute if we can't hear anything? Okay.
All right, we've got one more. All right, Kim Litzinger?
This just says that we've answered all the questions that came up. We'll
Guess
hope.
so.
I will hope that is true.
All
Hi,
right, folks. Oh, go ahead. Is that Ken?
Yeah, this is Ken. And so
Great.
we just wanted to make sure we understood if there were financial impacts if we close mid-year and HAP funding doesn't start until the following year. You know, are there transactions that run into issues with that, or how do we make sure that we have funds for those remaining months of that year that we're closing, you know, for those vouchers?
Sure. So great question. The way that the Rad conversion works is that the year in which you close, so let's say it was June of 2018, which we are in
Right.
now, and I've been reminded. The money that's available in the first year, it's not exactly the Hap contract, right? It's the money
Right.
that you've been appropriated in PIH, in your PIH appropriations. So I guess there's a couple things to say about it. One is you will need to do an initial year funding tool, which will help identify the money that is available. And if there is going to be a new owner, the thing I would say is that's a negotiation you have to make about how that money gets between the housing authority and the new owner. But that is the money that was available to you at the beginning of the year that you knew about. That's the money that you have through the end of the year, of the calendar year. Does that get to your question?
I think so. So if we were going to close in June, and once we find out how much operating subsidy and capital fund money we were going to get for this year, we would need to kind of set aside some of that in anticipation of paying, you know, some amounts to the new owner after the close of the transaction for the vouchers.
I don't want to say that I'm the complete and final expert on this, but what I would say is what you would have to do is be moving that money into the particular BLI line account in the lock system. The account is 1503, thank you, 1503, and that's where you would draw it down from. Once it's in 1503, you can draw it down. And we have a process here for moving that money right at closing time.
Okay.
Sort of either just before or just after closing, essentially.
Got it.
If I can just add, initially your funding tool, it's on the resource desk, so you would fill it out and it'll do the math for you and tell you how much you're going to need for the remaining.
Of course, it doesn't really tell you for 2018
Not yet, but it will be. We'll have
so at some point, I mean, it is a bit of a question mark right now because the appropriations for 2018 are not out.
Right.
So once those are out, our initial year funding tool will be updated with the actual money for your PHA and your PIC number, and then you'll have that at hand. I think there are other ways people deal with it when they've closed earlier in the year before the appropriations amounts are actually out, and that I'm really not expert on. So if you want to talk to somebody about that, maybe shoot an email to the Rad Resource Desk, and somebody can get back to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
And we've got two more questions.
Okay, let's do two more questions, and then we'll move forward.
All right. Joseph Meyerhoff?
Yes, good afternoon.
Great.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great.
Yep, go ahead.
If you have a development with a lot of units that are not going to pass HQS immediately after closing, and you were to close in December, would you effectively get a year for them to pass HQS before your Section 8 money comes into play?
So
I'm going to ask Leanne to answer because I don't know this.
So in the Rad PBV Hap contract, you're certifying that all units will be meeting HQS at the Hap effective date, or if you're planning repairs, that they'll meet HQS by that time. So if you close and you're doing a year of repairs, the units won't have to meet HQS until the repairs are done. But if you're closing with a no repair deal, those units have to meet HQS at the Hap effective date.
So closing in December and making the HAP effective date a year later doesn't change anything?
You have to make your HAP effective date either the first of the month following closing or the second of the month following closing.
Well, we do have delayed HAPs on some things. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at, but this sounds like maybe we should talk to you offline.
Okay.
Sure, and we happen to have Greg Byrne here as well, so he can add.
So, if you have indeed you have repairs as part of the conversion, then you don't have to meet the HQS until after you complete those repairs. But you still have the HAP date that's either the first of the month or the first of the second month following closing. So the HAP date doesn't change, but you do have if you have repairs, we give you a grace period to get the repairs done before you have to meet HQS.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, feel free to write in questions. I think there is a way to write them in here, but we aren't going to be reading any written in questions for this, but we will get back to people if you write in a question. Okay, closing timelines. We talked a little bit about it before of what sort of my ideal closing timeline would be for 8 weeks, but we have found every year of the program that the busiest closing season is in the fall from, say, September to December. And we have established through a memo that went out in March, we've established milestones and priorities. So we are transparent about how we evaluate and prioritize transactions. Again, meeting these does not guarantee that you would be closed, but this information is available. We've put on this slide just the milestone table, which you can look at your, at some time later, but you should also look at the memo because it does talk about prioritization. In order to keep active RCCs moving towards closing, we have just instituted something called delayed submission status. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it right now, but I do want to say, basically, we give you 2 months after the RCC is issued where you have the support of the closing coordinator and the OGC Field Counsel. And if we have not received a draft closing package after 2 months, then we put you in this different status where we take the, you don't have a closing coordinator assigned anymore until you get us a package. So that's sort of the basics of this, is to try to keep things moving and to allow the closing coordinators and field counsel to focus their time on the transactions that have things happening and that have provided packages and that are moving towards closing. And there is a memo that went out on April 27th that's also on the resource desk that discusses this, so you should take a look at that. But, if you are ready when the RCC comes out, you will never have to worry about it. So I highly recommend that. Okay, I think we'll go very quickly through this section because all of the Rad closing documents are available, are available to look at on the resource desk. On the resource desk, you have your checklist of documents that you must provide to us in your draft closing package, and you have the form of all these documents. So you have the, you have to have the PBV or TBRA contract. You will have the Rad Conversion commitment. I think, okay, so what I want to say about this now is that the information about the ownership type, the new owner, the existing owner, the PHA name, and about the information for the signature block of your signatories that will be the signatories on the legal documents between you and HUD, that we depend on you, the PHA, and your partners to enter that information. So in order to avoid administrative burden later, it's definitely worth your time to maybe talk to your counsel and make sure that you've got the proper names in there. I mean, for example, a lot of times we end up doing amendments because people are used to calling themselves City Housing Authority, but their legal name is Housing Authority of the City of something. So those kinds of things, it's not rocket science, but it definitely gets tripped up a lot of times. So just take some time to take a look at that. And if you have questions about what you should be entering, the first thing you could do is hover over any what we call blue buttons. The blue buttons, if you hover over them, they'll give a little explanation. And if that isn't helping you enough, you could definitely talk to your transaction manager. I think that was sort of on the next page too. Okay, amendments. If anything does need to change, talk to your closing coordinator. You can read this information later. I think we should move forward. The use agreement is, it's a very critical document for HUD. It's going to be recorded ahead of any of your financing documents. It's reviewed by OGC, our Office of General Counsel, the field counsel attorney who's working with us on any particular deal. And, it's critical. It's not a difficult form. I mean, in the form of, there's not much that has to be added to it, but the most important thing about it, of course, is the legal description. So if you have any problems with your title or survey, if anything's popped up, we cannot finish the RAD transaction and you cannot go to closing until we are sure that the legal description is proper and appropriate and we know what we're encumbering with the use agreement. It's like that sort of legal word. I've been working with a lot of lawyers lately. Take the time now. Again, this is something you can do in advance. And if you have a title or survey question, and even if you don't have an RCC yet, you can let us know and we can get somebody from OGC to try to connect with you even before you're in closing, if it looks like something that will take a while to clear. The Hap contract could be a completely entire separate presentation. So I think what I'll just say about this is that, you get to have the decision of whether you're going to choose to have a PBRA contract or a PBV. If you do a PBRA contract, make sure you look at the proper checklist, because with PBRA or with PBV and an FHA insured loan, you will need to fill out some HUD forms and to create that relationship with your multifamily specialist. Keep going. Sort of in connection with the use agreement, we're going to be placing the use agreement on. We've got to be releasing if there's any DOTs or dorks on the property. There could be multiples. Some of it depends on the history of that property. Some of it depends on the requirements of the state in question for how you do a release. So you'll just need to work with your counsel for what you need to provide. But our counsel also wants to see the original release, the original documents of the DOT or the DORC when you provide the draft documentation for the releases. The Consolidated Owner Certification, I mentioned earlier that the important thing to know about this is it's not a form document, it's a template. It needs to be tailored for every transaction. If you think there are things in it that don't work for your transaction, you can provide alternate wording. And I'm just thinking of sometimes when there's going to be a new owner, some people have wanted to make very clear which of the things on the cert are responsibilities of the PHA, which are responsibilities of the new owner. I mean, there are things you can do to make this work. You should feel like this document is a living document that needs to be appropriate for your transaction. And if there are any special conditions that need to be cleared through a certification, you can add that to this list. And this, again, the template for this is on the resource desk. So now I'd like to introduce Isabella Cabbage-Stock, who works with me here in the closing division. She also has a background in asset management, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about Objective 5.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Beth. So, Objective 5, understand the unique requirements for different types of RAD transactions, PBV, PBRA, with or without FHA. So the takeaway from this is that, as Bev mentioned earlier, that you're developing a relationship with your asset management counterparts in your local office. And so your transaction will be assigned a multifamily resolution specialist, AKA account executive, and that's going to be your main point of contact in that office for the transaction, and they'll be responsible for the approval of your affirmative fair housing marketing plan. That plan has to be submitted directly to that office for review and approval. The other component of that is that the document itself must be uploaded to the resource desk with the financing plan. So the actual field office or satellite regional center, they're going to be responsible for the actual review and approval of the fair marketing plan, but the plan itself has to be uploaded to the resource desk. So for the next thing is your 2530 applications. So the takeaway from this is that 2530s do not have to be approved for PHAs, but any other type of ownership must have the 2530 apps approval, and the approval can be submitted, the application can be submitted either electronically or in paper form to the local office.
Yeah, 42, page 42.
So the PBR closing checklist. The PBRA closing checklist provides details about HUD forms that need to be completed. We already discussed this. I feel like I already said this.
Well, but you have a quick reference guide question.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. So what the other takeaway about this is that we are in the process of updating our quick reference guides. I know the multifamily guide should be out within the next couple of weeks. And so that guide provides a lot of information on the necessary documents and requirements that the new owners and or PHAs will have to submit to once they join the Section 8 platform.
And I would just add, thank you, Isabella. I would just add that, again, you're going to have to be doing vouchering through these systems, and you can work with your multifamily asset specialist or the resolution specialist to be learning about it before you have to go live with it. In PBV conversions, I think the most important takeaway today is to remember that if you are the PHA and you are the owner and you want to go PBV, there has to be some other entity established to be the owner for purposes of the Section 8 contract, because the PHA itself would be the contract administrator and can't have the same entity on both sides of the contract. So what we've determined is that for purposes of the Section 8 contract, the owner is an entity that has responsibilities for management and leasing. So you can work with that, and if that's the way you want to go, you have to think about that, I would say, early in the process. You also have to have a voucher program in order to be the contract administrator for the PBV contract. There's a difference between PBV and PBRA also in the way that they look at what a HAP contract can cover, because in PBV the rules are that you, as they're shown here on this slide, it's really that things have to be contiguous. So if you have buildings that are 3 miles apart in PBV world, you could not have them on the same HAP contract. But in PBRA world, it's possible that you might be able to. So if you want to think about that as part of your decision-making process, that is something to be aware of. And sorry, the last thing on that slide, there is also a PBV quick reference guide, which Greg, do you know if they're updating that one as well? Or we know the PBRA one is being worked on. So I don't know about the PBB, I'm sorry. If you are going to have FHA insured financing as part of your Rad conversion, it will mean that you're dealing with the FHA side of HUD, the production side of HUD, as well as the Rad side. There will be a closing coordinator from the production side as well as a closing coordinator from the Rad side, and neither commitment will be issued until both sides know they're ready to issue commitments. Generally speaking, FHA issues first, but the idea is that you shouldn't have anything until everybody's ready to move forward. For all conversions, remember, you got to leave time and plan for executing the new leases, that after the closing, you're going to have to file the EOPs, your end of participation forms. And again, we talk here a little bit, touch here as well, to remind you about the money that you will see on the initial year funding tool. Again, that tool is to help everybody understand what money is available for the end of the year. And if you are doing the conversion of your final or only remaining public housing units, there are special requirements from PIH. They were in a notice, and you have to work with your PIH folks to make sure you do whatever you need to do for those requirements. Okay, you've closed, but you're not done yet, because you've really enjoyed working with your closing coordinator so much that you're going to remember that you need to send in your recorded documents. We need the documents we need right away to make as evidence that this whole thing has been completed, as the PDF of the recorded use agreements, the DORCs, the Hap Contract, and any amendments that were done at the end that we need to have your fully executed version. Again, I want to remind you, we don't want any of the paper here. You do not need to send anything to us from the recorder's office. You just need to send us a PDF of the fully recorded document. And then there is a, you'll get information in an escrow letter, and actually I think it's available also on the resource desk, what your list is of what needs to be uploaded to us that we want to have as part of the transaction docket, the final docket. After you do that, when you've completed your construction or rehab, that's what part of the scope of work in your RCC, we now have a process for showing us what you've accomplished, and that needs to be submitted within 45 days of the work completion date. So we have instructions for that, and this is really critical for us. It goes to the heart of the program and our justification for this program and our positive outcomes for this program, that we need to know that the work that we've approved actually is accomplished. And one last thing, if you have a delayed conversion agreement, which I don't even think I've mentioned, but maybe once here, but delayed conversion agreement, if you have that where the HAP does not take effect for a while, and I don't want to go into it too much right now, if you read it, it's only a couple pages. Again, it's up on the resource desk. You need to let us know in advance of when you're planning to actually have the HAP become effective.
Bev, maybe it'd just be helpful to say just 2 seconds on delayed HAP generally applies to projects where you're doing new construction off-site and you're waiting until the construction is complete before the HAP is effective.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. I think I should just say now, the last set of slides, we have listed some resources for you, and we've also listed some tips for smooth closing. But I think rather than go through those right now, why don't we turn to see if there's any questions we can address.
We've got 2 hands raised. The first one is Michael Tadros. You've unmuted your line if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi there, it's Mike here. I'm trying to find out, we have RHF funds and allocating them. Are they done the same as capital funds once we receive the RCC?
If you're just contributing it as part of the source of the development budget, yeah, it's no different than your capital fund contribution.
Okay.
The other option for RHF funds is you can use it as a way of augmenting the rent. You can trade it in and boost up the rents based on what the kind of the value of those would be over 20-year life of the Hap contract. But either way,
we're looking to use it as a source. Yeah, we're looking to use it as a source for construction. So we would just allocate it.
Yeah, just identify it in the development budget.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
And there's a line item for RHF funds, right,
Yeah.
Greg?
Yes.
Our next question is from Will Beatty.
Yeah, hi. Regarding the PBV ownership entity and the relationship between the entity and the Public Housing Authority, it said that the Housing Authority needed to be the contract administrator. Is it a problem if the Housing Authority is both the contract administrator and the management agent for the property?
Yes, that is exactly what the problem is. I mean, well, I think you need to talk to your own counsel probably, and probably you might want to figure out what you are envisioning, because I'm not sure what you're saying exactly, because if, Greg, do you want to take?
So the distinction isn't necessarily between the management agent and the PBB administrator. It's between the PB administrator and the owner of the covered project. So
Sure.
The PHA cannot own the property and be the PBB administrator. There must be something either where you put the property into a affiliated nonprofit, or the PBB administrator ends up creating a separate entity to do the leasing for the project.
So what I don't
Sure.
know is,
So what we've done is have created a nonprofit that will actually own the properties.
Then you're great.
And
then you're great then.
Okay.
You're fine.
And all right. And so it'll be okay for that entity to be under contract to be managed by the Housing Authority as well.
No problem.
All right. All right. I'm good. Thank you.
okay. Anybody else? Any other hands popping up?
And one more hand from Shamira Shirley. Shamira, can you hear us? We've unmuted your line. All right, we'll come back to you. We've got one more. Lisa McCarty. We've unmuted your line if you'd like to ask a question.
I'm sorry, I was unmuting. Did you say Lisa?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. For the PDD, you mentioned that you can only have one HAP contract within the 3-mile span for buildings. So if you convert, can you have multiple HAP contracts within that one project?
Yeah, so you might have an AMP that has several buildings. Now, I was just using as an example the 3 miles. That's not the rule. The rules were listed on that slide, and you'll have that, but they basically, in PBB world, unless it's a scattered site, if you have something that's a scattered site, that's a different discussion. But if you've got 2 buildings that are next to each other on along the same street, you could have them under one HAP contract. But if your AMP has a building, and then there's a privately owned building, and then the next thing down the street is another public housing building, those 2 are not contiguous because there's that privately owned building in between, and you would have to have, by the rules of PBV, as we've learned them, you have to have 2, one contract on each of the buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I just want to do a caveat that I am the closing director. I know about our closings. I've learned a lot about all the different requirements, but if you have something unusual, special, or, if you have questions, I would encourage you, let us know, and we'll make sure that people who are subject matter experts can help you. That was a collective you, plural you.
All right, and we've got another hand up from Betty Saunders. Betty, we've unmuted your line. Betty, are you out there? Would you like to ask a question from Jacksonville? All right. We'll come back. I think that's it for questions.
Okay, well, should we look at the tip for, again, we will be sending out the slide deck so you can look at the list of resources. The tips for smooth closing. So again, these are things you should think about before you get to closing, so that when you get to closing, you'll be ready to get your RCC and move towards a successful close and a successful conversion. You have ownership considerations as we've already touched on a little bit. You have to think about your ownership data that you're inputting to the resource desk for correctness. Again, that can trip us up at the end if we need to change things in an amendment. You need to look at you have to register for the app's system, as I understand it, but you don't have to get 2530 clearance for the PHA entity. And you may need to talk to the PIH field office, the multifamily folks in the field office to find out which part of which entities need to get 2530 clearance. And I think that should be done while you're still working with the transaction manager in the underwriting phase, right, Greg?
Yes, you should be applying for it by then, and but you don't necessarily need to have it approved by the time you submit your financing plan.
And that, again, that whole 2530 question relates to if you have a PBRA contract that you're going to use, or if you're choosing PBV and also having FHA insurance, and FHA insured financing.
And I just will add that there's a great guide on the resource desk that walks you through who needs to submit 2530s and various ownership structures, so check that out.
Okay. Well, I think we only have a few minutes, so maybe I was getting too optimistic here. But this just shows you what you need to think about for your operating and property management considerations. I don't know really if I can help too much on any of this. What's the next slide? Your closing team, I would really urge you to be sure that you have a counsel who can help you, and to look at your title as early as possible, and also look at the legal descriptions on your, find your declaration of trust and look at your legal descriptions, because sometimes it's clear that there's going to be problems. Financing, it's important, if it's mixed finance conversions, to be talking to the lenders from the original mixed finance and be sure that you're going to be able to do the changes that you need for the Rad conversion. Okay, number 5 here, I just want to say again, this may have happened where after closing somebody said, the architect gave us the wrong information on the units for the new construction. That just may have happened, and it may have happened that people said, oh, I didn't notice there was a typo, and we really have X number of these bedroom units and Y number of those, and not the other way around. Like, these things happen. It's easy to understand why they happen, so I would really suggest to you that they can create an awful lot of pain and heartache, and just, again, burden for everybody involved. So it's much easier if you take the time to look at your chap and talk to your architect and make sure that everybody really understands the units and what you've got there. Residents' rights are very important. Make sure you are following all the rules. And do we have any more pages? That's it. This webinar was recorded, and we will post it, right? And we will be sending out slides to those who registered for this. So thank you all so much for your time and attention today. I really look forward to helping all of you get to successful Rad closings. And my phone number and my address are somewhere on here, right? Where did they go? I don't know. We'll add them if they're not here. Oh, yeah, they're here. Page 55, when you get your slide deck. So, you know, feel free to write to me or to call me if you have questions, and I'll certainly try to facilitate getting you to the right person for an answer if it's not me. Thank you all so much.